You ever get that sinking feeling when you open the mailbox and see a letter that immediately makes your stomach twist? That's how it started for me. Just a simple envelope, stamped with the HOA logo. I'd lived in this neighborhood for nearly a decade, always following the rules, mowing the lawn on time, and never once complaining about anyone else's quirks. But apparently, following the rules wasn't enough. The letter claimed that my backyard fence was in violation of HOA height regulations. Too tall. Can you believe that? Too tall. My fence wasn't some looming fortress-like monstrosity, was a simple privacy fence, the kind families put up to protect their kids, their pets, and their peace of mind. But according to them, I'd crossed a line. I reread the letter 3 times. First, in disbelief, then in anger, and finally, in a sort of weary resignation, knowing exactly what would come next. Threats of fines. Threats of forced removal. Threats that made my blood boil. The funny thing is, these weren't just random warnings. The HOA had inspectors, people whose full-time job seemed to be walking around the neighborhood with tape measures, rulers and clipboards, measuring fences, checking paint colors, and making sure no one dared to enjoy their own property too much. And now, my fence had attracted their attention. I stepped out into the backyard and ran my hand along the top of the fence. Solid wood, perfectly straight, nothing extravagant, just enough height to block the view from the street and neighboring houses, enough to give my kids some privacy in the yard and my dog a safe space to roam. I had never thought about the HOA's rules beyond casual compliance. But now, all of a sudden, this fence had become my enemy. The next day, I saw the inspector, Mr. Henderson, clipboard in hand, pacing along my property line like a hawk. He was small, wiry, and looked like he enjoyed his little power trips a little too much. He squinted at my fence, tapped his clipboard, and muttered under his breath, "Even a few inches over the limit can't be ignored," he said, looking up at me with a smug grin. "We have to enforce the rules. Otherwise, we set a precedent." I stared at him. A few inches. It's a 6-foot fence. 6 feet is what most backyards have. Are you serious? He smiled as if I was the one being unreasonable. Rules are rules, sir. You'll need to either lower it or face the consequences. Consequences. That word echoed in my head as I watched him walk away, clipboard clutched tightly. And that's when I realized something important. They weren't just asking me to comply. They were daring me to resist. They were assuming I would cave. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the letter. The inspector's face burned into my memory. My mind raced through possibilities. Lower the fence, tear it down entirely, replace it with a shorter one. Every option felt like giving up. And giving up was never in my nature. Not when it came to my home, my family, or my peace of mind. I began researching HOA rules, local property laws, legal loopholes. I read through dozens of pages of municipal codes, past HOA disputes, even court cases where homeowners fought back and sometimes won. That's when I realized something that made my blood boil with excitement. The HOA didn't have unlimited power. Their rules were only enforceable if they aligned with local laws. And if there was a way to bend the rules without breaking the law, well, that's exactly what I intended to do. I also started paying attention to my neighbors. Some of them gave me sympathetic smiles. Others shook their heads, clearly afraid of the HOA's wrath. Most were silent, unwilling to get involved. But a few whispered quietly, "You've got guts," standing up to them. Just don't let them see you sweat. Days turned into weeks. The inspector returned multiple times, each time pacing along the fence, measuring, frowning, and scribbling notes. Letters piled up on my porch, each one more threatening than the last. Late fees, fines, threats of legal action. The HOA board. seemed determined to make an example out of me. And I had to admit, at first, the fear was real. I worried about the fines, the legal notices, the reputation of being that difficult neighbor. But that fear soon turned into something else. Determination, a stubborn, fiery determination that this fence, my fence, would not be torn down. Not now, not ever. I began planning, not just a taller fence, not just a stronger fence, but something that the HOA couldn't just walk in and remove. Something that would protect my family, respect the law, and stand as a silent challenge to anyone who tried to control my backyard. At this point, I was fully aware that I was stepping into dangerous territory. If the HOA escalated diff, they sued. If they called in the authorities, I would have to be prepared. But I also knew one thing: some battles are worth fighting, even if the other side seems untouchable. That night, I sketched ideas on a pad. Materials, measurements, construction techniques. I thought about permits, legal angles, and even the psychology of the HOA board members. Every inch of that wall would be a statement. Every brick, a declaration that my property was mine to enjoy. And then came the moment that made everything real. The HOA president himself showed up at my door. Mr. Grayson, a man who clearly took his role far too seriously. He carried a stack of papers, his expression a mix of irritation and entitlement. "Mr. Lawson," he began, using my real name now in that patronizing tone, "we've given you ample warning. This fence must be reduced to comply with our height regulations immediately. Failure to do so will result in fines and possible legal action." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Ample warning," I said. "You mean threats? And no, I'm not reducing it. Not an inch. Not for you. Not for the board. And definitely not because someone thinks they have the right to dictate how I protect my family in my own backyard." His face went pale, and for a brief moment I thought I saw respect or maybe fear flash in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He handed me the papers, gave a cold nod, and left. I closed the door, holding the papers in my hand, and felt something shift inside me. The wall wasn't just going to be wood and nails. It was going to be a fortress, a statement, a victory waiting to happen. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to fight the HOA with letters or emails. I was going to fight them with action. And what I built next would be something they could never tear down. The next morning, I walked out into the backyard, clipboard in hand. Not the HOA's, mine. It was covered in sketches, measurements, notes about materials, and legal references I'd spent hours combing through. Every detail mattered. Every angle had to be perfect. I started with the foundation, concrete, solid, thick enough that even the most determined demolition attempt would be slow, noisy, and legally questionable. I dug trenches deep into the ground, measuring over and over, making sure everything aligned with property lines and local code. This wasn't just about defiance, it was about precision, legality, and endurance. As I worked, I could feel the weight of the neighborhood's eyes on me. Some neighbors peeked from behind curtains. A few brave souls waved in support. One of them, Mrs. Patel from 2 houses down, even brought me iced tea one afternoon. She whispered, "I've had run-ins with them too. You're the first one with enough guts to fight back." I smiled, grateful for the solidarity, but mostly I kept my head down and focused. Meanwhile, the HOA was not idle. Letters turned into phone calls. Calls turned into formal notices. By the end of the week, I had a stack of threats on the kitchen counter, each one more ridiculous than the last. Immediate removal, daily fines, legal action, imminent. They even hinted at calling law enforcement to force compliance. I laughed, not out of mockery, but out of realization. They had power on paper, but they didn't understand one key thing. I wasn't afraid, and fear is what drives compliance. remove the fear, and rules become suggestions. Construction progressed quickly. I ordered high-grade materials, reinforced steel posts, pressure-treated wood, and interlocking panels designed for stability. I wasn't just building a fence. I was building a wall that would stand through storms, inspections, and whatever petty vendettas the HOA could muster. Every evening, I'd step back, wipe sweat from my brow, and admire the progress. The structure started to take shape, taller than the previous fence, stronger, and most importantly impossible to remove without significant effort and legal consequence. Then came the first confrontation. Mr. Henderson. The inspector showed up again, clipboard in hand, looking flustered. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the work underway. Sir, he started, clearing his throat, you do realize that this structure exceeds the maximum allowed height under HOA regulations. I leaned on the partially constructed wall, arms crossed. I realize it. And I also realize that I'm within the limits of municipal law. You see, I checked every code, every ordinance, and every permit requirement before laying a single post. Care to see the paperwork? He glanced nervously at the stack of documents on my workbench and shuffled backward. Well, we'll have to review this. Reviewing, that was the new battle cry. They couldn't remove the wall. They'd have to go through legal channels, and that meant time, money, and effort. Meanwhile, the wall continued to rise, inch by inch. By the end of the second week, the structure was nearly complete. Neighbors stopped by more frequently, offering tools, encouragement, and advice. Some were curious, some were worried, and a few were outright amazed. One teenager even took a video for social media, whispering excitedly, "Dude, you're making a fortress. The HOA doesn't even know what hit them." And hit them, we did. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, presumably to discuss how to deal with my insubordination. I wasn't invited, of course, but I had inside sources. They were panicking behind closed doors, trying to figure out loopholes, past precedents, anything to give them leverage. Then came the most audacious move of all. One morning, I noticed a van parked suspiciously near the street, HOA logos plastered on the side. Two men stepped out with cameras and tape measures, clearly intending to document the wall and report it as a violation. I waved cheerfully. "Morning." I called, "Here to measure some progress." They froze. One muttered something about being authorized to, but didn't finish. I walked closer, casually pointing out the permits posted in the window, the zoning approvals on the table inside, and the fact that this construction was fully legal. Their confident demeanor wavered. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, they retreated to their van and drove off. Muttering, that's when it hit me. The wall was working exactly as intended. Not just physically, but psychologically. The HOA had underestimated me, and now every move they made was reactive, hesitant, and ultimately ineffective. But this wasn't just about winning. It was about sending a message. About boundaries, respect, and personal freedom. I wasn't the only homeowner feeling suffocated by arbitrary rules. The wall became a symbol of resistance. It wasn't just wood and steel. It was a statement. My home, my rules. And yet, I knew. The final showdown wasn't far off. They would escalate, try to find new angles, maybe even take legal action. That's when I started thinking 2 steps ahead. Reinforcements for the wall, extra legal documentation, evidence of compliance with every possible rule, every screw, every plank. Every permit was now a weapon in the battle to come. By the time the wall reached its full height, it was awe-inspiring. Not ostentatious, not flashy, but undeniably strong and immovable. The HOA had plenty of reasons to be angry, but they had no easy way to enforce their will without risking their own credibility. Local legal trouble, and perhaps even public backlash. Neighbors took notice. I could hear whispers of admiration when walking past the houses nearby. Some waved, some nodded with respect. Even those who had been cautious began to see the futility of the HOA's intimidation, and through it all, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most powerful resistance isn't yelling, threatening, or arguing. Sometimes it's simply building something that stands for what you believe, and letting it speak for itself. Little did I know, the HOA wasn't finished. Their next move would test not just my wall, but my patience, my ingenuity, and my resolve in ways I never expected. I had thought the wall itself would be enough to make the HOA back down, but as I soon learned, nothing was ever that simple. By the third week, the letters turned into formal legal notices. Suddenly, it wasn't just a few fines, they were talking about injunctions, lawsuits, and court dates. Their tone had shifted from smug confidence to a mix of anger and desperation. I sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the latest notice, sipping my coffee, and smiling quietly. Every claim they made, every threat they issued, had already been anticipated. Every inch of my wall was backed by permits, municipal codes, and photographs showing strict adherence to regulations. They were running out of options. Still, the tension was real. The HOA president, Mr. Grayson, started showing up more frequently. Not personally this time, he sent representatives who claimed authority to inspect, measure, and report. I treated them the same way I had treated Henderson, politely, firmly, and with a complete stack of documentation to prove that the wall was entirely legal. One morning, as I worked on some finishing touches, sealing the wood panels to withstand rain and sun, I noticed a small crowd forming at the edge of the street. Neighbors had gathered quietly, peeking over fences, whispering among themselves. I realized they were watching, evaluating, maybe even hoping the HOA would fail. I called out, "Good morning. Beautiful day for a wall, isn't it?" Some laughed, some waved. I could tell that, for the first time, the neighborhood truly recognized. What this wall represented wasn't just privacy, it was courage. It was the idea that you didn't have to let an organization bully you, just because they had a logo and a stack of paper. Then came the first real test. One of Mr. Grayson's attorneys sent over a demand, immediate removal of the wall, or the HOA would escalate to the local courts. They claimed the structure violated height regulations and interfered with the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the letter. Aesthetic uniformity. That was their angle. Not legality, not safety, just the subjective idea that my backyard didn't look right. I laughed aloud. The audacity was almost impressive. I called my own attorney, a local property law specialist I had consulted early on. She reviewed the situation, smiled, and said, "You've done everything by the book. They don't have a leg to stand on. If they escalate, it will cost them more than it costs you, and you'll likely come out ahead." I knew she was right. That gave me confidence, but it also meant I had to remain vigilant. The HOA was like a storm cloud. They could huff and puff, send letters, intimidate inspectors, but unless they actually got a court order, they couldn't touch the wall. And even then, the legal battle would be theirs, not mine. Still, every knock at the door, every clipboard-wielding visitor sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. The HOA was relentless, but so was I. I documented everything: dates, times, conversations, letters. Every interaction was logged, every photo timestamped. I knew that if this went to court, I would be ready. The pressure didn't just come from them. My neighbors became part of the story in unexpected ways. Some offered to help, some volunteered their opinions, and one even took it upon themselves to post updates on social media. Suddenly, what started as a private backyard dispute had turned into a small neighborhood phenomenon. People were taking sides, commenting, and sharing. The HOA couldn't control public perception the way they controlled their board meetings. Then came the most shocking moment. Late one afternoon, I received a knock at the door. Not the HOA, not their inspectors, but a mediator. Someone sent by the HOA, supposedly to resolve the dispute before it escalated to court. I let him in. He looked nervous, almost embarrassed, holding a clipboard that seemed more like a shield than a tool. "Mr. Lawson," he began, "the board. They want to find a compromise." I raised an eyebrow. "A compromise? You mean asking me to remove a perfectly legal wall that protects my family and property?" He swallowed, clearly struggling to find words. "Well, maybe. Perhaps adjustments, or partial compliance. Something," I smiled, calm but firm. "Here's the deal. The wall stays. It's fully legal. It's within city regulations, and it's here to stay. Any further actions will be through proper legal channels. If the board chooses to escalate, I'm ready." He nodded slowly, realizing that there was no intimidation left to exploit. I had built not just a wall, but a position of strength. And that's when I knew something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to unfair authority, showing the neighborhood that compliance doesn't have to mean surrender. The following week, the HOA attempted a final maneuver. They sent letters to neighbors, painting me as the problem, hoping to isolate me. But it backfired. Many neighbors came to my door, offering support, asking how they could protect themselves from similar harassment. Some even joked about starting their own privacy projects. By this point, the wall had become more than a physical structure. It was a symbol, a reminder that knowledge, preparation, and determination can turn even the most bureaucratic nightmare into a victory. And yet, even with everything in place, I couldn't shake the anticipation. I knew the board might try one last, desperate move. Perhaps a legal challenge, perhaps a public confrontation. I was ready for it. Every screw, every plank, every permit was my armor. Looking back, it was strange how a simple fence had escalated into a full-blown battle. What began as a few letters and clipboard inspections became a story of resistance, strategy, and ultimately, empowerment and the wall. The wall was perfect, solid, legal, and untouchable. The HOA, of course, didn't take it lightly. Their frustration was palpable. Letters escalated into veiled threats. Phone calls became louder, and a sense of desperation seeped into their tone. But I remained calm. I knew the wall was bulletproof, not just physically, but legally. Every permit, every ordinance reference, every photograph I had meticulously collected was my shield. Then came the final confrontation. The HOA president, Mr. Grayson, arrived in person with a small entourage. This was at their big moment. They marched to my door, documents in hand, faces tight with indignation. "Mr. Lawson," Grayson began, tone sharp, "you have defied repeated notices. The board will now pursue legal action. You are ordered to remove the structure immediately." I smiled politely. "You're welcome to file your legal action. I've prepared for that. Every inch of this wall complies with city codes and property laws. Your threats don't change that." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "But you can't just decide the rules don't apply to you." "I'm not deciding the rules," I replied. "I'm following them." Unlike the HOA, which has a history of selective enforcement and intimidation. The tension in the air was thick. They wanted me to flinch, to give in, to make a mistake. But I didn't. I stayed calm, measured, ready. And that's when something interesting happened. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes. At first a few, then more, until a small crowd had gathered along the street. Whispers and murmurs spread. "He's right. It's legal. That wall can't be touched." The sight of support, the subtle but unmistakable solidarity, changed the dynamic instantly. Grayson faltered, realizing that any extreme move now would be witnessed, recorded, and potentially viral. Public opinion mattered more than HOA rules when it came to social perception. I took a deep breath and said, "If the board attempts to remove this wall without proper legal procedure, it will cost time, money, and reputation. I've done my homework, and I'm ready to protect my property." Grayson's face reddened. He shuffled papers, muttered something under his breath, and finally, defeated, signaled to his group. They left, not with dignity, but with the unmistakable weight of failure. After they were gone, neighbors approached me, expressing admiration, curiosity, and relief. One neighbor joked, "I should have done this years ago." Another smiled, "You just set a precedent for all of us." It was surreal, but deeply satisfying. In the following weeks, the HOA attempted to regroup. Letters continued to arrive, but they were weaker now formalities rather than threats. Their inspections became rare, tentative, almost apologetic. I continued to document everything, not because I expected a challenge, but because this was my victory, and every detail mattered. The wall became more than wood and steel. It became a symbol. It represented personal empowerment, the ability to stand up against bureaucracy, and the fact that knowledge and preparation can turn even the most intimidating adversaries into observers. Friends and family celebrated quietly with me. The kids had their safe space again. The dog ran freely without worry, and my backyard finally felt like it was truly ours. The HOA, they had learned the lessons. Some rules are not meant to be wielded as weapons, and some homeowners are willing to fight smart, not just hard. I sometimes walk past that wall and marvel at it. Not just at its physical presence, but at what it represents: patience, courage, strategy, and resilience. Every board letter, every inspector visit, every whispered threat only made the victory sweeter. And in the end, it wasn't just about standing up to the HOA, it was about standing up for myself, for my family, and for anyone who's ever felt powerless under arbitrary rules. Because sometimes, the best way to fight bureaucracy isn't with anger or fear, but with preparation, determination, and a wall that says, quite literally, "This is my home, and these are my rules." With the wall fully standing, the dust had settled, but the story wasn't just about wood, steel, and concrete. It was about the people, the power, and the principle behind it. For weeks, I dealt with letters, inspectors, phone calls, and even the occasional whisper campaign. Now, all of that felt distant. The wall had done its job. It protected my family, respected the law, and sent a message the HOA couldn't ignore. I took a step back one evening, watching the sun cast long shadows over the backyard. The kids played freely, laughter echoing. Between the fence panels, the dog chased after them, tail wagging, completely carefree. It was a simple scene, but to me, it symbolized everything I had fought for: peace, privacy, and control over my own property. Neighbors continued to stop by, some curious, some offering congratulations. "You really did it," one of them said. "I can't believe the HOA didn't win." "I didn't just build a wall," I replied. "I built a boundary. Not just for my property, but for what's right." Knowledge, preparation, and persistence are stronger than threats and intimidation. The HOA tried one last desperate measure. They hinted at filing a lawsuit, but this time, I was ready. My attorney had everything organized: permits, photographs, communication logs, zoning codes, and legal references. When the notice arrived, it felt almost anticlimactic. We responded calmly, legally, and firmly. Within days, the HOA backed down entirely. Their maximum enforcement had been exhausted. My wall had stood untouchable and unshakable. Looking back, I realized how much this experience had changed me, I had learned that bureaucracy is intimidating, yes, but not unbeatable. Rules and regulations may feel oppressive, but knowledge turns them into tools rather than chains. And most importantly, standing your ground legally, strategically, and calmly can turn even the most frustrating challenges into victories. I still walk past the wall every morning. I run my hands along the top, feeling the smooth panels and the solid steel posts beneath. Every inch is a reminder of persistence, planning, and courage. And every time I see the neighborhood kids playing behind it, or neighbors nodding in quiet respect, I feel the satisfaction of having turned a simple fence dispute into a lesson in empowerment. Some might think it was just a fence, or just a fence, or just a wall, but in truth, it was more than that. It was a declaration. I will protect my family, my property, and my peace, and no arbitrary authority will make me feel otherwise. The HOA may continue enforcing petty rules elsewhere, inspecting fences, measuring paint colors, and intimidating new homeowners. But for me, this chapter is closed. I won, my family won, and my wall. It stands as a symbol for anyone who has ever felt powerless against an institution that overreaches. So, if you're ever in a similar position, facing threats, intimidation, or unreasonable rules, remember this: knowledge is your shield, preparation is your weapon, and determination is the foundation. Stand firm, plan carefully, and act decisively. You might just build your own wall that nobody can tear down, because at the end of the day, some battles are worth fighting, and some walls are worth building. Thanks for watching this story of standing up to the HOA and building a wall they could never tear down. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more real-life neighborhood battles and inspiring victories. Have you ever faced an unfair HOA or rules that didn't make sense? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Remember, knowledge, preparation, and determination can turn any challenge into a victory.